Imagine this: Chicago's bustling streets in the early 1900s. Amidst the chaos of immigration and industrialization stands Hull House, a beacon of hope founded by the legendary Jane Addams. But behind its noble facade lies a sinister legend: a baby born of wickedness, cursed by the devil himself. Is this chilling tale just a ghost story spun from superstition? Or did the devil baby truly haunt the halls of Hull House? And what about Jane Addams, a social reformer revered by millions? How did she become entangled in this dark narrative? Step into the shadows with me, Dave Schrader, your host, and my guest, Amelia Cotter, as we uncover the truth behind one of Chicago's most infamous ghost stories. Prepare yourself for a tale of intrigue and a glimpse into the unexplainable. I'm Dave Schrader, and this is my Paranormal 60.
I'm not gonna stand here and listen to this baloney.
He won't float. He doesn't stand for baloney.
Sounds like a lot of supernatural baloney to me.
Supernatural, perhaps. Baloney, perhaps not.
Good evening, my darklings. We are very close to the New Year's, and I'm so glad that you're here to spend some time with me this evening. I will be here on New Year's Day Eve. I'll be here on January 1st, live, 9 to 10 p.m., and I hope you'll join us for an Anything Goes New Year's Day Eve extravaganza. Let's go with that. Sounds fancy. I think we can do that. I'm excited about bringing our next guest on because she's never visited with us on the Paranormal 60, and it's about time she does. She's been a longtime friend of mine, and she is an amazing author, researcher, and storyteller with a passion for diving into everything supernatural, history, and folklore. She's known for her books like Where the Party Never Ended and This House, The True Story of a Girl and a Ghost. Amelia has shared her expertise on shows like Coast to Coast AM, the RIP Files, and Hometown Horror. She's based in Chicago. She's a seasoned haunted history tour guide, a conference speaker, and a member of the Society of Midland Authors. Amelia's latest project, History Alive, showcases her talent for bringing the past to life, and we are lucky enough to have her join us now. Ladies and gentlemen, Amelia Cotter. Good evening, Amelia. Good to see you.
Good evening. Good to see you too. Hi, everybody.
It's been too long.
I know. I haven't seen you. Last time I saw you was at Chris's event in Woodstock. And then you interviewed me on Darkness Radio in like 2011.
Yeah. Wow.
It was a long time ago.
Yeah. It's very crazy. Well, I'm glad we're able to connect now.
Yeah.
I saw that you've got an article out about Hull House in the brand new episode of Haunted Magazine.
Yes, indeed. So my research into Jane Addams and the Devil Baby at Hull House, as well as other things, is featured in issue 46 of Haunted Magazine. It's also in, so glad you asked, The Morbid Curious, number 9. So I don't have Haunted Magazine yet because it's still like in the mail. I just checked the mail and was hoping it would arrive.
I got it.
Oh, you did? Oh, okay. Well, good. I'm the last person who's going to get it. And it's been sent back to, probably. And then it's also going to be featured in the upcoming journal from the, oh my goodness, why am I drawing a blank? The Association of Paranormal Studies, from the Paranormal Research Symposium from Gettysburg this summer.
Oh, very cool.
So lots of places to read it.
That's awesome. And this place holds a special place in my heart because growing up in the Chicagoland area, I got to visit Hull House for the first time with the legendary Richard Crowe, the ghost hunter from Chicago who used to host all the Chicagoland ghost tours.
Yeah.
And I went along with my good and oldest friend, Rick, and we went out and they take you around all of these places with these amazing stories. And then they bring us to Hull House. They tell us the stories. And then they gave us about 10, 15 minutes, just kind of walk around the outside of the building, and you could look in the windows and take photographs. And my friend Rick and I were looking in the windows, hoping to see a cloaked figure, I don't know, a demonic baby scrambling across the floor, something to keep our intrigue. And unfortunately, there was nothing there. But I took my camera. Back in the day, I had this thing that was a camera, and it had what's called film inside of the camera. It wasn't my phone, Amelia. I know it's hard to believe.
Weird
I held it up
concept.
to the window, and I pushed it up tight against the window so I wouldn't get any reflection back. And I took 3 pictures, and that was it. Well, weeks later, as it used to be, when you'd finally finish off that roll of film, I took it in to be developed. And Rick and I got together, and we were going through some of the fun pictures of our bus journey and some of the neat haunted locations we got to stop by. And then I said, oh, well, this one's ruined. And I tossed the picture across the table to my friend Rick. And he goes, I don't think so, Dave. And I go, what do you mean? And he spins it back over to me. Back in the old days, you'd take the camera in or the film in, they would process it. Sometimes you take in 24 image film and you get back 18 pictures because a bunch were mucked up or didn't process properly. Well, this had that kind of big blob in the middle of the picture that just looked like it was poorly created, poorly developed from the angle I originally looked at it. But when he threw it back and it spun across the table at me, I suddenly realized that what I was looking at was not just this amorphous blob, but it was a hand reaching towards the window like this. So for those of you watching, the hand looked like this. Now I thought, oh, I caught her holding the camera. And I held it up, and I'm like, no, my hand would have looked like this.
It's your hand, right?
Yeah, this was actually reaching towards the camera, and there's nothing back behind it, and there's nothing being blocked out of it. So there was no camera blocking out any part of the image. So that was our holy nonsense moment. And I remember excitedly calling Richard and telling him, and, well, you'll have to send me out a copy of that, Mr. Schrader. And I sent him out a copy of the picture, and he called me back and asked if he could show it in his tours, and thought it was a great catch. And that was, I think, first official ghost photograph. And that was probably when I was about 20 or 21 years old.
Oh, that's awesome. I've never taken any compelling photos there myself, but I have seen a few that are really incredible. There used to be a few that we would show on the Chicago Hauntings ghost tours, and those had been taken either by Adam Seltzer or they had been given to him by folks that were on his tours. There were some really interesting ones of what looked like a baby on the staircase. And there was another one that looked kind of like a figure floating on the stairs that maybe looked like a woman in a long gown. And there was another one that really creeped me out that was taken in the courtyard next to Hull House that looked like a little girl kind of like spinning really fast in a circle, like she was dancing and she was caught in mid-motion. And, when I first moved to Chicago, because I'm from Maryland, the Hull House was one of the places that really enchanted me. So the devil baby story, I thought was really compelling. And it was interesting because a lot of the ghost hunters at the time, and this was 2008, 9-ish, really thought that the devil baby was a spirit that was haunting the Hull House. And my experience with doing the ghost tours. So when I worked with Chicago Hauntings ghost tours and we did the bus tours there, I took all kinds of people. It could be a group of 10 people, a group of 60 people on like a coach bus. We never had anything like a devil baby, although sometimes people would experience the spirits of children. And people always had very compelling experiences there. So it was on the building itself is on the campus of the University of Illinois, Chicago. So sometimes UIC students would come on the tour and they'd be like, oh, I walk by here every day and it doesn't seem very haunted. So during the day, it's very innocuous, cute little museum house, a residential home that has been turned into a museum. But by night, it takes on this otherworldly kind of flavor, and people would have the wildest experiences there. I had to call 911 once because somebody had a seizure after they got back on the bus because they swore that a little girl had followed them back onto the bus. And this was something that was a common story that other tour guides had told in the past as well. So tour guides, I kind of inherited what I felt was this sort of like ritual of hazing, which was that they were like, oh, beware the courtyard of the Hull House. And I was like, that sounds like such nonsense. There's a force field there. There's a portal. You can't go in. Your nightmares, they'll come to your nightmares. And I was like, okay, sure, you betcha. But people would have really wild experiences. They would get violently ill. And they would take all sorts of interesting photographs into the windows of the home, because obviously we could not go in the evenings. And I would have nightmares. Interesting dreams. Sometimes working on the ghost tours was kind of interesting, because after you've talked about death and dying and ghosts and, the nature of death and, spirits for 6 hours, it's kind of puts you in a certain mind frame, I guess. And so I would often dream really vivid, lucid dreams of like clipping newspaper clippings and images of people. So it wasn't necessarily spooky, but it was definitely like I was receiving kind of like information, like this residue would stick with me after I had been coming back to these places night after night. And then there was one night where I heard, I lived with a roommate at the time, and she wasn't there. So I had both of our dogs, her dog and my dog, in the bedroom with me. And I heard this like shuffling outside in the hallway next to my bedroom door that sounded like the feet of like a lady in old lady slippers, shuffling up and down the hallway. And when I got up to use the bathroom like a grown woman, I like opened the door and like darted across the hallway and shut the bathroom door. But in that moment that I darted across the hallway, I just glanced off into the kitchen, and I saw what looked like a woman in a nightgown, just for an instant, that resembled what people would describe seeing at the Hull House or photographing at the Hull House. And I have always told myself that was just my midnight brain. But it definitely left an impression on me. We'll put it that way.
Yeah, it's the places that you get to visit, the stories you get to hear, and then the people that are with you. I often wonder how often their anxieties, fears, and such play into the tour guide's experiences afterwards, because many tour guides I know have left after years of doing tours because they felt so overwhelmed at night afterwards. And when I started asking him, do you really think it was the ghosts of the locations or the anxiety of the people that were on the tour that were having these moments? And a lot of them were thinking afterwards, they're like, wow, I never put it in that perspective before. Yeah, maybe it was the fears everybody brought with them.
That's a good point too. Like the spirits that we encounter at some of these places too, are they separate entities of people who have passed on, or are they these creations that we sort of all kind of that amalgamate into these sort of these ghostly these apparitions that we encounter? I know that it weighed on me after a while in a weird I have felt a sense of sort of guilt. I don't think I would feel that now. I think this was something that this was 10 plus years ago. I've done private tours around the city since then, but my time with Chicago Hauntings, I did just tours back to back to back, as you do during the season, as it's called. Right. And it just sort of weighed on my heart. Like, am I the steward of these people's stories? And what's funny is that I am the steward of those stories. That's been my whole career, has been a storyteller. So interpreting stories on behalf of the dead and also interpreting stories on behalf of other experiencers. So now I feel strongly about that. But at the time I was very conflicted about whether it was right for me to be tramping around there every night and making a spectacle out of it. Because there are some folks, Chicago Hauntings was a decent tour and still is. But this was an era when like people were doing Segway tours dressed in like zombie costumes. And I used to get mad, and I was like, Amelia, you're here with your coach bus full of 50 people, and you're upset because the Segway tour isn't respecting this hallowed ground because they're all dressed like zombies and stuff. And so it's like kind of introduces you don't know where the line is until you kind of cross it. And so for me, witnessing that was like, man, this is crossing it. So well, now this
is certainly an interesting legend, and one that I I mean, I remember, but very briefly, growing up out there, the legend of Resurrection Mary and Resurrection Cemetery, and so many of the bride and the little child saint spirit that's at one of the other cemeteries. There are all these other stories that come around, but you think the devil baby story would stick with people a lot more. And when I mention that to Chicagoans or people that have gone on tours, a lot of them are like, I think I remember hearing that. And you would think, wow, that story should just be embedded into our heads. It's been told, in different ways for so many years. So let's kind of take it back here. Introduce us to Jane Addams and the Hull House.
Sure. So the Hull House itself was built by Charles Hull in 1856. That's how it got its name. This would have been when that area of Chicago was prairie land, largely, pioneer territory. It was on the outskirts. So it was a summer home for him and his family. He was a, wealthy entrepreneur, and his wife, Millicent, did pass away in the home from an unspecified illness. That is the only reported death in the Hull House. As far as the Hull House settlement goes, there was another death later during Jane Addams' time when a woman was killed by her fiance out sort of in front of one of the settlement areas. So Charles Hull, the family ended up leaving the mansion. So the mansion was also affected by the Great Chicago Fire. It went into disrepair. When Jane Addams came to Chicago, by the time she got there in 1889, so several decades later, the city was built up around this area, and this was largely like a slum kind of area. So today, again, it's near the UIC campus and Little Italy. So it was a large immigrant community, lots of Eastern European immigrants, and then a lot of Italians, Germans, and Jewish people. And Little Italy is kind of the holdover from that time. So in any case, she found the house in disrepair. A distant relative of the Hulls decided to pay for some renovations and also decided to pay for Jane Addams and her crew to live in the house rent-free so that she could develop the Hull House settlement, which at the time was this pioneering place. It was 13 buildings, 13 large buildings, plus the Hull House itself, which is just, which was like a house, like a mansion. To us, it wouldn't look like a mansion, but it was a mansion during that time. And so that was her home and administrative building. And then these other 13 buildings are where she did her pioneering social work. So today it doesn't wow us as much as it would have at the time. But she provided all sorts of social services for people that had not previously existed in the United States, and especially in Chicago. So this included like English language classes, detox for people who were alcoholics or on drugs, art classes, places where children could gather and play, gymnasiums, sort of like creating a safe space for people who needed help in some way to be fostered and cared for. And so the devil baby legend kind of fits nicely with that narrative because, as we'll get into, it would not have been out of the question for a child or other children, which is maybe why there are children spirits around, that could not be cared for by its mother or a mother who did not want their child. Today, we can take them to like a fire station or something like that. At that time, they left them on the doorstep of the Hull House. And so it wouldn't have been out of the question for this to actually happen, which is kind of part of the legend. About 2,000 people visited the Hull House a week to receive some kind of services.
Wow. That's a lot of people.
Yes. Yeah.
So this was really a hub. And because of the services, I've got to guess too, that these are people that are dealing with anxiety. They're dealing with stress. This is maybe their last chance for getting help. And that kind of anxiety layered upon this location, do you think that that's had any kind of impact into the way this house is currently perceived?
I absolutely would. Just the whole area, right? Because the area was considered a slum. There were a lot of people who were sort of forced to the borderlands. Kind of, this was a place where people were poor. They were immigrants. People were struggling. So we hear this story today. This was happening at that time where people were bringing their children, or first generation immigrants were teaching their children to become Americanized. And so those kids were leaving old customs, they were leaving the religion, they were leaving the language, and they were abandoning their families to go live the American dream, right? And so you had an aging population. So when Jane moved into the house, it had previously been a place where nuns had been living with and fostering to seniors. So this was like a senior home prior to that, which is also important because people will sometimes see cloaked figures. Mm-hmm. And it's possible that those cloaked figures could be nuns or religious figures and not something more sinister, but I digress. So yeah, people were like really hard up and they were really sad. And this was Chicago in the, turn of the 20th century. So if you think about like the meat packing plants and the types of work that people did and the hours that people worked, and the days that people worked, and just the trickle down effect of all of that into these communities where people just struggled. And then there were wars as well. So people being sent off to wars and all sorts of stuff. So this was not a fun time. We think of like the opulence of Chicago and the grandeur, especially around the turn of the 20th century. Coming back from the Great Chicago Fire and having the Great World's Fair and all these really cool, magnificent, sort of bombastic events that took place in Chicago. And this was kind of like the runoff of that, the dark, seedy underbelly.
In Chicago, there seemed like there was a lot of that as history came through, right? This city itself seemed to be steeped in blood, as though the devil himself had dragged his pitchfork through that town and left just a chasm there for crime, viciousness, just the type of activity that even still takes place there today is pretty unsettling. It almost feels like, and I grew up in that area. I don't want to cast this, ominous black cloud, but there definitely feels like there's something about Chicago that still carries the burden of a curse or the burden of birth. Maybe that's it, just from, all the people that came and went with all their desires and greed and want to make a new life, and how that it impacted and affected the winners, losers, and everyone that got caught in between.
I 100% agree. Chicago does have that sort of chaotic energy. And it's a great place if you're interested in like folklore and hauntings, because there's so many like highly charged places, and it really does feel like there's Chicago is struggling with its identity now, its modern identity, and you can really feel that in the way there's this tug of war, with preserving historic places, and then the restlessness of souls and things like that, and a lot of just historic events that have taken place that have no plaques and markers or any sort of remembrance and acknowledgement, things that the city brushed under the rug while, that don't make any sense. So it's us weirdos who really like remember it.
Right. And like that there's no brass plaques denoting Dave Schrader ate a hot dog here or got his first ghost picture. I still don't understand. I have
written so many letters. I've received some cease and desist letters in return, but yeah, I've tried. I've done my part.
Well, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, let's start to dive into the story of the Devil Baby and Jane Addams' connection to this weird story. Is it legend? Is it lore? Or is there more to the tale? We'll discuss that with our guest, Amelia Cotter. And we have a link for Amelia on today's program guide. So for those of you watching live or those of you listening to this podcast, you can find more about Amelia, how to get her books, keep up with what she's working on, and more. So check that out in today's program guide. We'll be right back with more of the very best in paranormal programming. I'm Dave Schrader, and this is the Paranormal 60. It's the holiday season, a time of giving, receiving, and maybe even answering life's most mysterious questions. What better way to bring joy and clarity to yourself or a loved one than with Love and Lotus Tarot readings by Winnie Schrader? This December, give the gift of insight, empowerment, and a little holiday magic. Because when you buy one tarot reading, you get one free. That's right, buy one, get one free all month long. Whether you're curious about the past, seeking answers in the present, or wondering what's in store for the future, Winnie's loving, empathetic, and accurate tarot readings are the perfect way to connect with what matters most. Choose a cozy phone reading or a face-to-face video session. Perfect for this festive time of year. Visit www.paranormal60.com and click the Love and Lotus tab to learn more and book your readings. Again, that's www.paranormal60.com. Click the Love and Lotus tab. This December, the best gift is to give and receive with Love and Lotus Tarot readings by Winnie Schrader. Don't wait. Book your readings today and make this season truly magical. Only 2 days remain. Not even really, if you think about it. You've got tonight and all day tomorrow, the 31st, to go ahead and book your reading. Now, Dave, there's no way I'm going to be able to fit 2 readings in before January 1st. You don't have to. If you make the purchase before January 1st, you get the 2 for 1, and you can use those anytime going forward. So you can buy it now and have 2 readings for yourself, or buy one for yourself and give a reading to a friend, and they will be able to use it in the next calendar year. So check it out. Go check out paranormal60.com. Click on the Love and Lotus tab and book your reservation now. All right, we're back. Amelia Cotter, our guest, and she's written a couple of great books. As a matter of fact, Where the Party Never Ended, Ghosts of the Old Baraboo Inn from Wisconsin, and This House, the true story of a girl and a ghost. And we're going to have her back on the show in the future, either here or on the Paranormal 360, to talk about these cases, these stories, and more. So make sure that you keep subscribed so that you always know what's going on with us right here on the Paranormal 60. All right, Amelia. Now let's start to dive into this very strange story of the Devil Baby of Hull House. Set the stage for us. When is this taking place, and is it during Jane Addams' time there?
Yes. So the year is 1913. The day is October 31st. And
of course it is.
A news story breaks in the Chicago Examiner that a devil child has been brought to the doorstep of the Hull House settlement. So backtracking, there's always a few sides to things, right? There's the history, there's the folklore, and there's the ghost stories. And sometimes they have an intersection with each other, and other times they don't. The legend has it that a little bundle of joy was dropped off on the front stoop of the Hull House, and that when Jane and her helpers took it inside, they discovered that it was not a baby at all, but a gruesome being with cloven hooves, a forked tail, and horns. That when they tried to have it baptized, it jumped out of the priest's arms and began to run around and yell profanities and smoke cigars. So this by today's
birth story of Al Capone.
Right, yeah, it writes the origin story. That's a great, So by today's standards, that's not like a particularly spooky story, but by 1913 standards, this was fire. Okay.
Wait a minute. How disenfranchised are you, Amelia, that a baby with cloven hooves and horns leaps out of the arms during baptism, starts swearing and smoking cigars, and you don't find that kind of creepy?
I had the joy of being alive and in the line at the grocery store as a child when the Bat Boy, articles came out, and I leveled in the Weekly World News, with the National Enquirer, and I was like, wow, is that real? Like, what a world we live in. So yeah, I must be jaded. So I'm not saying it couldn't and didn't happen. I'm just saying it doesn't scare me the way that it doesn't titillate me the way that it did the people of Chicago at the time.
Sure.
And so to sort of backtrack even further, the story that came from that was that, and there were different versions based on what ethnicity, nationality, or religion you were. But the story was that the woman who birthed this devil child, the devil baby, was, a woman who had already had several children, and her husband didn't want to have any more. And when he found out she was pregnant, he cursed, he said, "I'd rather have the devil than feed another mouth in this house." And thus the child was transformed in her womb. Sometimes it was because a Protestant had married a Jew, and this, of course, was going to be an abomination. Sometimes it was, just, pick a story that it would feel like culturally relevant at the time that would be scandalous. So again, today it's not particularly scandalous for us to think of people intermarrying, but at the time it would have been a very big deal, and it would have been a big deal on people's minds in this particular environment in the big city, where people are leaving behind their old world customs, and people who were clinging very hard and very desperately to the countries and the traditions that they had come from, and watching their children sort of float away into a new and uncertain future. So the story is really symbolic, and that's why I love it, because that's my interest in all of our ghost stories, up to today, is what does it say about us, right? So the legend gets kind of spun out from there. So Jane Addams in real life experienced thousands upon thousands of visitors to the doorstep, banging on the door, demanding to see the devil baby. And of course, she was unable to ever produce the devil baby, because I will spoil it for you, it probably wasn't real, probably didn't exist. But people, I know.
Well, thank you for joining us, Amelia.
So, but this didn't stop people from saying, well, that's because she's got it locked up in the attic. And then, there are different variations of what happened from there, including variations up to modern times that I heard when I first moved to Chicago in 2008, that yes, the child was kept upstairs. It grew from a baby into a little boy, and then it was subsequently drowned or killed, buried in the courtyard, which is why the courtyard is so haunted. And so again, you can kind of choose your own adventure with the different ways that that people would spin this story out. What's interesting, people have seen these sort of ghoulish little faces in some of the upper windows and like the attic level windows of the house that they're like certain is the spirit of the devil baby. But sadly, it seems that there may not have been a real devil baby, although I can assure folks that the house is still supposed to be quite haunted.
Now, the concept, there were a lot of people back in the day.
Was very shocked and scandalized initially.
I was going to say, there was a lot of strange folklore and superstitions that surround babies, births of babies, and how they may be born. Some would actually, they believe, would turn into werewolves or vampires, depending on how they were treated, the things that were said, or how they were birthed into the world, right? So this isn't such a far-fetched concept back in that time. We're dealing with all these different cultures, all their different belief systems, all merging into one cross-cultural state.
And imagine just the pain and the how just the insanity of giving birth, right? Like just how much can really go wrong. And I've heard some interesting stories that so exactly what Melina's saying, that it could have been a game of telephone, kind of, where like a child with ichthyosis or some other type of deformity or disease was brought to the doorstep of the Hull house by somebody who was not like, no, I'm not doing this. And that somebody might have seen it, and then it kind of, spiraled outward from there. The Jersey Devil has a similar origin story. So this type of story is sort of an iconic piece of folklore that finds its way in different pockets in the US and also comes over from Europe to these really cool legends. So in any case, Jane was, at first she was pissed. Okay. So she was like, oh my God, I have so much work to do, and this is a waste of my time. Upon people come over, they kind of got used to all of these visitors that really wanted to see the devil baby. Like, hey, I'll pay you 5 cents, whatever I have to do. I really want to see the child. Like, coming with their morbid curiosity, basically. She's decided to sort of take a beat because Jane Addams was interested in folklore. She was like hip to a good ghost story. And she was also interested in the demographic of people that were coming over, because a lot of them were older immigrant women and like disenfranchised people of the neighborhood who, you know, had like a score to settle in their own lives. And the story of the devil baby, sort of as we've described it, really resonated with them on this deeper level. So she decided to sit down with them, either literally over tea or, you know, taking notes and hearing what they had to say and listening to stories about their lives, listening to stories about their children or their husbands, their grandchildren, their life experiences, and basically all the terrible things that they had been through or had to go through, and how they felt kind of vindicated by this idea that not only that the devil baby might exist and sort of bring some sort of retribution to abused women, but also just the idea that there's more to life out there, that just the idea of the devil baby was just exciting. Smoking cigars and yelling profanities and doing backflips in the pews and everything. It just made life more interesting. What is out there? We're not alone. This isn't the end. And then third thing, in a more religious sense, you know, or moral sense, was that good things can happen to bad people. So the story of this poor mother who gave birth to a devil child, you know, helped them understand that they weren't responsible for the bad things that happened to their family members or the things that were done to them in their abusive situations and relationships. So Jane wrote a whole book about it. So,
wow.
Yeah.
So they took it seriously in a different route, right? Where she was trying to give some credence to these stories, or you know, why these belief systems existed, and psychologically why we kind of need these stories.
Right. She became really fascinated by it. And so she was still, I'm sure, annoyed by the onslaught of people that were, you know, in her face every day. But she also just really appreciated the needs of these people, also just to have their stories heard. I think on a micro scale, I think you and I know that just from going to conventions for so many years, where you just meet people who want to pull your ear for 5 minutes and tell you the weirdest story you've ever heard in your life. And it doesn't matter whether you think it's true or real, but they just need to tell somebody. Or the amount of photos I've gotten in emails over the years from people who are like, send me the stupidest looking photo of like a little orb, you know, a dust orb, you know, a spider on the lens or whatever. And they're like, I felt the presence of my grandmother on my wedding day. Do you think this is my grandmother? Absolutely. Yes. That, you know, I think that was your grandmother. There are more important things sometimes than needing to be right or fight a fight. Right. So, Jane put this into much better words than I could. So I'll show you real quick that the book that I read, and there's a few books that she's written that have good material. But the best one, and you can get on Amazon for like $7.50, is The Long Road of Woman's Memory by Jane Addams. And she has that beautiful flowery, you know, smart person language from the 1920s and 30s that she wrote this with. And some of it goes into other sort of autobiographical territory, but a huge chunk of it focuses explicitly on her time with the devil baby and sort of the impact that it had on her personally, in her journey too, as like a social worker, and the lessons that she kind of learned from it.
Now, is it true that, or is it believed that this story is the one that kind of spurred the story of Rosemary's Baby?
That's what I've heard. So I've heard that Ira Levin, who wrote the novel, was inspired directly by this particular story. That's what we always said on the tours.
Right. Yeah, I remember Richard Crowe sharing that years ago.
Yeah, it probably was handed down from Richard, but that's been my understanding this whole time. It's such an iconic story, you know.
Now,
Jamie,
when we go back,
Jamie commenting.
What was that? Oh, Jamie says Amelia has so much knowledge
so
in
much
so many areas.
I Venmoed him $10 before this to say that. So
Well, it was money well spent. And had he just Venmoed me 5, I would have put it up anyway.
oh, now we know.
This is where it gets intriguing, right? When you start looking at the cross sections of history and beliefs, and then the strange, because back then there was inbreeding going on through families. There's a very good chance that some of these children could have been misshapen or deformed in some way. And believe it or not, folks, you can do some research on this, but there are people that do develop horns, that will grow horns from their head. And it's actually like a fungus under the skin that after a while creates these horn-like appendages.
And children that are born with tails.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Webbed hands and feet are still taking place today. So there is a very good chance that, this could have happened. People spin things out of control. It's probably not great business in the way that Jane Addams would want people to come visit, and if there was a deformed child that was raised there until it passed or was able to move on its own, again, she seemed a woman of compassion who would not P.T. Barnum this situation.
No, she definitely wouldn't. And there's nothing on record to suggest that this actually happened. It's everybody's best guess if there is a true story behind it. And perhaps we can speculate that if the baby was going to die in infancy, like with ichthyosis and some of those other things where they do pretty much die in infancy, that she would have given it a respectful burial and maybe never talked about it. Maybe there were plenty of things that she talked about, including her, experiences with ghosts and things like that, including in the Hull House, which we can get into. But she never spoke on that. So if it was something that any of her employees happened to work with, then they had the sort of the grace to leave it in history as it is, and not, like what you were saying, turn it into a further spectacle.
This sadly mirrors a very similar situation here in Minnesota with the legendary performer Prince and his wife Maite. They had suffered a loss of pregnancy, and for a long time they had kept that kind of illusion alive that the baby was healthy and fine, just being kept guarded. It wasn't until much after that the story broke that the baby was deformed and lost its life, and that Prince, being a very protected man and a very spiritual man, did not want that being part of his or his child's legacy, to have that story brought back out. And there's a lot of people like that through history that have made those choices. And sadly, we know, shooting the Holzer files, there were a few cases where we did treat our infirmed very poorly. We would have a family of 3, and one of the children would maybe have a leg 2 inches too short, or something, and they were relegated to the attic or the basement or padlocked rooms because we couldn't take the chance of them appearing at a window or at a party. And then Dave and Amelia have one of the most atrocious children. Have you seen it? And
the shame and
so sad.
And this was also in Jane's time. This was when you could be sent off to, an infirmary or a school for imbeciles, or whatever terrible name they had for it. Just if you were a runaway. So if you were a teenage girl that had a crush on a boy that your parents didn't like, you could be sent away to an asylum, and some people never left. And they got worse and worse. Like, there's the story of Rhoda Derry, which comes from the Bartonville Asylum here in Illinois, who was kept in a Utica crib for like 40 years. And she was a perfectly normal person. She just, she was like a troubled teen when she was 14 and picked the wrong guy to go after. And her parents sent her away. And she spent her last years here in Illinois, living in freedom. But of course, by then it was too late for her. So it's really fascinating to think about that. So like the pain and the gore of childbirth, the shame and the sadness of having family members who aren't perfect, and then putting that into the context of the time where you could be considered crazy for anything, crazy or stupid or not fit to be part of regular society. And then they just ship you off, or like you said, relegate you to the attic or the basement. It was terrifying. And I'm sure so many, legends come from that.
I grew up in the Chicagoland suburbs and lived in a little town called Medina. Right near it was a town called Bloomingdale. And in Bloomingdale, there was a children's home, Mark Lund Children's Home. And I had followed a cute teenage girl there one day. I was enticed by her siren song to go, and they were looking for volunteers. I had no clue what it was, but if it meant I was going to get to hang out with this cute girl, I'm in. And we went in, and I had to go through training and kind of indoctrination. And then when they first brought me out to meet some of the kids that I would be working with, they started me off slow and brought me this gorgeous little girl named Brenda. And she's just such a sweet, beautiful baby girl who had sadly suffered brain damage falling in a pool. But just such a beautiful, loving little sweet girl. And they kept moving me through the line of people. And the final room they brought me to, and I talk about this in Richard Estep's book about the devil and our perspective of the way we view things. And they brought me into this room, and this was the 80s. So we were a much more advanced people, right? We would like to think, but they bring me in, and for all intents and purposes, his crib was this metal cage with a plexiglass bubble over the top. And she said, "I'd like to introduce you to Jude." Now, I was a teenage boy, 16 years old, and there was this twisted up, deformed little monster in this crib. Now, bear with me, folks. Follow me, right? And that was my initial take. I just saw this twisted up little kid with a mouth kind of jacked up and off to the side and twisted teeth. And he was just staring at me. And growing up watching Nightmare on Elm Street and, Jason Voorhees from the Friday the 13th, everybody's always these disfigured, sinister creatures. And she goes, "Well, reach your hand in and shake Jude's hand." And I remember just that knot in my chest and in my stomach. And I was appalled. And this was 1983, 84. Oh God, I don't want to touch it. It was just this, what am I looking? I was so outside of the realm of anything I'd ever seen before. So I did as they asked, and I slid my hand in, and I know it was trembling and sweaty. And I was just terrified he was going to launch forward and bite my hand off like every horror movie. And this little boy just cocked his head and looked up at me and leaned his face in against my hand and kind of stroked his face against my hand. And this beautiful, twisted smile broke out over his face. And I fell in love with Jude from that point forward. He used to sing Winnie the Pooh to me when I'd come in, or Hey Jude. And he was just this sweetheart of a little child. But I told him, I said, if you're going to introduce somebody to Jude, and he doesn't need to be in that cage because he's not some kind of Hannibal Lecter monster, you might want to take him out to introduce him, because that just added to the specter of fear. And you could just imagine that's what they used to do. They used to have those lidded kennels for the children. And you see that, and it seems like, oh my God, they've locked it into this cage, and then it's so twisted and deformed. I could see how people felt that way. And especially undereducated, immature people would say and do things. That moment changed my life. I loved working at Mark Lund Children's Home and had a great long voluntary career there. And I'm so glad that I got past that initial fear. But it's very easy to see how people can make those very sad and tragic leaps to
right. It's natural. It's natural for us to be afraid or shocked or feel uncomfortable around people with disabilities, just at all. Just,
Right.
And sometimes it can be just like, I used to work with a deaf person, and I know that a lot of deaf people don't consider that a disability. And so just my awkwardness, shining through in those moments. It's a universal for us to kind of feel uncomfortable in that situation. I think it's okay and valid to admit that and to talk about it and to,
And I encourage people
Ooh, I
on
like
an
that.
paranormal investigation. If you encounter something in these old asylums and old poor farms that looks demonic or frightening, maybe show some compassion and empathy, because that person may have never gotten love in life. And even in the afterlife, it's met with this fear. We have to take a very quick break. We'll come back. We'll talk more with Amelia Cotter about this. We'll also talk about a few of the ghost stories and paranormal encounters of Hull House. What are some of the other theories behind that? We'll discuss that and more when we return right here to the Paranormal 60.
Did you know that radio just got a little extraterrestrial? That's right, Dave Schrader is back on radio with the Paranormal 360 every Sunday evening, 7 to 9 p.m. Central on WCCO AM 830, an Odyssey station. Just download the Odyssey app and look for the WCCO logo, follow the station, and listen live. That's the Paranormal 360 on WCCO AM 830, an Odyssey station.
Welcome back to the program. And remember, if you do like the paranormal and you like the strange and you're just not getting enough from the Paranormal 60, every Sunday night, WCCO Radio, join me for the Paranormal 360. It's a longer, more in-depth series. And not only can you listen to it live by asking your smart device to play WCCO Radio every Sunday night, 7 to 9 p.m. Central, you can also find me on just about every app. So wherever you listen to your podcasts, look for Paranormal 360. And you'll find more information there. Amelia Cotter, our guest this evening, as we've been discussing Jane Addams and the Devil Baby of Hull House in Chicago. Let's talk about a few of the other ghost stories that are associated with this and some of the other sightings that have taken place.
Let's do. I just really want to touch on what you were just saying before the break, which was the idea that, how important it is to go into places like these old hospitals or asylums with reverence and understanding. Even, prisons, places like that, these are not our playgrounds, and these are real people that were once alive. And in many cases, if these places were closed in the 80s and 90s, a lot of the people that were inmates there are still alive. And their relatives and family members are still alive. And I think it's so important, like you said, if you encounter something that seems like it's trying to scare you, or if something feels scary to you, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's trying to scare you or that it is bad. So absolutely.
Agreed. And again, this public service announcement is brought to you by Dave and Amelia. Just show some compassion to the spirit realm.
Show some damn compassion. Yeah.
Well, the problem we're led to with that as well, I want to give some understanding, is because there are people out there that have worked in the realm of the demonic and have helped families and dealt with things. And unfortunately, there is this travesty that it's believed that some of the beings we encounter that may have twisted or deformed body parts, it's because that is the way that God keeps the demon from completely confusing us, because there's always something off. If it's a twisted arm or leg or missing an eye or part of its face, we can know that it's trying to replicate something human. And I'm often left wondering, and how many times have we run screaming from that room when really it was just the John Merrick, the Elephant Man, just seeking some kind of solace even in the afterlife, or this little child or Jude or something that just really needs our attention. So you got to be careful doing this field, because there's so much you can get wrong.
Yeah. And the way that we receive the messages and the energy, sort of evolutionally, we are hardwired to be afraid. But that not, the way that we're receiving that communication makes us afraid, but that might not be their intended result, So stories about the Hull House. So when Jane Addams got to the Hull House in 1889, she was already hearing ghost stories about the house from the other people who were working and living there, including people who were upstairs tenants who kept a bucket of water on the stairs to the attic. And her theory, she was never able, she said in her own words, she was never able to get like a coherent response about why, but that she believed it had to do with the old superstition that spirits couldn't cross water, so that something was in the attic and they were trying to keep it at bay with their bucket or their pitcher of water. There's another famous story about Millicent Hull, who did pass away in the home. She is supposed to have haunted her bedroom, which is generally believed to also have been Jane Addams' bedroom. And the story goes that Jane Addams was in her bed one night, laying next to her partner, when she opened her eyes and saw a woman standing over her, looking down at her. And that when she reached out her hand to turn on the gas lamp, when the light came on, the figure vanished. And so the story was that she encountered the ghost of Millicent Hull herself. And like I said, Jane Addams was interested in folklore. She loved a good ghost story. And this was certainly a good era for really wild ghost stories, as we know from the Devil Baby story. So stories have circulated around the Hull house for years. I think I mentioned earlier about like people seeing weird ghoulish faces in the windows, suggesting that, that the devil child was haunting the house. Children are heard running around and playing inside of the house. And there's like a student community center right behind the Hull house. And I don't know if it's still there, but as of 10 years ago, there was like a bowling alley and a Dunkin' Donuts and just kind of like a social hall. And people have heard the sound of a baby crying in the bowling alley, as well as in the courtyard area of the Hull house. People have seen the cloaked figures, which some people believe to be something a little more sinister. Other people say, no, it's the little sisters of the poor, or the Little Sisters of Mercy that were there prior to Jane Addams, that were running this kind of old folks home. And then more modern stories that I heard as a ghost tour guide were that there was just something in the courtyard, something wrong with the courtyard. So there's the house, there's the courtyard, there's the remnants of an old like dining hall, and then everything else in the 13 building settlement from Hull House is gone now. It's all modern buildings, it's all UIC campus and things like that. And so this little courtyard is very innocuous. If the UIC students were on the tour, they were just laughing about it because they thought it was hysterical that this could be haunted. But at night, it took on that weird kind of aura. That's where that photo was taken of what looked like a little girl dancing. And people would encounter sort of like a wall of feeling where they couldn't go any further. They couldn't go into the courtyard, or they couldn't pass a certain point. There's a large outdoor sort of porch that you can walk around. People would kind of walk around the area. They would not be able to pass, beyond a certain point. There were often stories told about a little girl coming back onto the bus with people. I would get folks on the ghost tours that were drinking, bachelorette parties, totally fine, legit. It is what it is. There was always the 3 people in front who were completely listening to every single word that I was saying and taking mental notes on all of it. People all the way in the back who were dead asleep after 15 minutes. And then the people in the middle who were just rowdy and drunk. So it was always a very interesting mix of people, but usually they sort of like snapped to attention at the Hull house. Something would strike them about this place, and then they would sober up. They would take on a somber tone. Sometimes they would cry. I had the one person have some type of seizure, and she had to be taken away in an ambulance. And we heard later that she was totally fine. Her friends went with her. Just really interesting. And I had heard a story too from the old bus driver, Wendy, who's my bus driver when I was there with the little black ghost bus that used to chug along in the city. And she was a riot. And she told me that there was one night way back in the, early 2000s, before my time, when they were out at the Hull house one night, and one of the windows in the upstairs bedrooms shattered from the inside out.
Ooh.
And that to me, and she was there, I think she was there with Adam Seltzer, and he's not somebody who messes around when it comes to telling ghost stories. So I think they both witnessed that, which would have been pretty cool, I have to say.
Yeah.
um, so my experiences were relegated to just strong feelings and emotional connections to the house. And then the nightmares and the dreams that I would have afterwards, sort of the lucid dreams of people I had never met, information that was vivid during the dream, but then I would forget it right after. And so stories persist to this day. Now, what's fun, that is great news for people who are interested, is that decades and decades, the people who ran the Hull House Museum, as it's an esteemed museum, they did not want to have anything to do with ghost hunters at all. They would ignore your emails and your phone calls. And in the last couple of years, they have kind of lightened up. And I can also totally understand why they would not want to have that kind of riffraff. Like, not all ghost hunters are created equal in their ethics, but anyway, they lightened up. They've embraced their history and kind of the fun and the folklore of it. And I think more of Jane Addams' work is coming to light. The way that she treated the devil baby at the Hull House is so fascinating that they wanted to kind of spotlight that. So now they do give tours during the Halloween season. And something that I learned just today is that the Ghost Files, so Ryan and Shane actually filmed an episode there, and they just did like a screening of it this October at Hull House, which is unprecedented for them because they were so anti paranormal, everything for so long. So they're warming up to it. But you can visit anytime during the day during their business hours, because it's a fantastic location just to walk around. It's a beautiful museum, beautiful home. And now during spooky season, you can get in there and do the spooky stuff.
Very cool. Well, Amelia, it's always a pleasure catching up with you. We'll look forward to talking to you about your other books here in the future. So thank you so much for being here, and we wish you a very happy New Year.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining me. I have an important announcement I'd like to make, if you don't mind. We're often reminded a little too late about how precious and short life is. And I'm going to address this in public on the show. I'm not posting about any of this on social media per my family's request. But because I am a concerned father, I am going to ask of you, my darklings from around the world, to keep our family in your prayers and thoughts. Our family was to expand on Christmas with a brand new grandchild. And sadly, the baby was stillborn. It was a tragedy that no one saw coming, and has deeply impacted and affected everybody, of course, in our family. This leaves me with grave concern for my child and their partner. And I come forward to you many times asking for prayers and healing for many of you across the board. And tonight, without getting into specifics, because my child is very protective of their private life, I won't be giving any names or specifics, and I prefer you do not post about this. If you want to add my name and our family's name to private prayer sessions, please just don't tag me in it. Don't make any public posts about my family's issues right now with this. And again, this is not because of embarrassment or anything on my part, but to try to respect the dignity and wishes of my children. But I'm a father and a grandfather who's hurting and worried for his child. And I would just love for you to please include our family in your continued thoughts and prayers. It's been a rough year for a lot of people, not just the Schrader family. We can just pray that 2025 brings us all peace and grace and a new beginning. We have a day left of this year. And it's real easy to get caught up in the let's just cut things and be done with this year and launch into next year. And sadly, it seems like that's the way we always end every year now. How bad last year was. Let's begin something new. Take the time that you have before the new year launches to put away past problems, to reach out to the people in your life that mean something to you. And gentlemen, I'm talking to you. Don't be afraid to tell your friends you love them. Don't be afraid to tell your friends how they affect your life. The women have got that down. They know, they understand, they're supportive. Guys, there's no shame in the game to be kind and compassionate to your friends and let them know. Because I'm sure that every one of them would rather know in the living years than to hear it spilled at their funeral. This is a tough time all around the world. And we're heading into a new year with a lot of new uncertainty from both sides of the political spectrum, from sides of worried about possible wars as it's constantly in our news, about financial issues and situations and prices going up. We have enough anxiety and fear in this world that we just need to start showing some empathy and compassion for the people in our lives. And we need to start treasuring those moments and those people a little closer and a little more, because there is no guarantee that they will be with us tomorrow. I thank you for the many years of love and support that you've shown me and to my family. And I know that God hears our prayers, that the universe is always listening. And I just ask that you ask for blessings for our family as we will ask for blessings for yours. And Lord, I just ask that you be with every person that encounters this show, no matter what their belief systems, no matter where they are, psychologically, sexually, financially, religiously. Lord, I just ask that you be with everyone. And I ask that you open their hearts and minds to compassion and empathy, to patience, generosity, to remind us that these virtues are so important for us to have a full, meaningful life. And Lord, for those people that are hurting and broken right now, I lift them to you. And I ask that you fill their hearts with love, surround them with healing, and bring forth their ancestors, their friends, their relatives, and anybody that has preceded them in death to give them life and give them meaning and purpose again. Because I know that when we raise our voices to you, you hear our prayers. I thank you so much for all that you've done for our family and for my friends and followers and for this show. And I ask that you bestow blessings of success, happiness, and love to the people of this planet. I pray this in your name. Amen. Thank you, my friends. I will be back here New Year's Day Eve. We will celebrate the beginning of something new together. We'll share some laughs. We'll share some stories. And as always, you can always reach out to me at dave@paranormal60.com. Thank you for allowing me in on your journey, and may the darkness of this world be a little brighter with the information that we share here. And again, I will ask you, please do not post anything personally about my story tonight, so that I may continue to protect my family from the pain that they're already dealing with. But keep us in your thoughts and prayers. Thank you and good night.
Did you know that radio just got a little extraterrestrial? That's right, Dave Schrader is back on radio with the Paranormal 360 every Sunday evening, 7 to 9 p.m. Central on WCCO AM 830 and Odyssey station. Just download the Odyssey app and look for the WCCO logo, follow the station, and listen live. That's the Paranormal 360 on WCCO AM 830 and Odyssey station.